At 31 years old, I was being subjected to forced starvation. I was waterboarded. I had sleep deprivation of, I believe, up to 8.5 days, but I was hallucinating at that point, so I'm not sure completely. Anytime I didn't do as I was being told or compelled to do, I would have to go through these things. So I learned to
edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. You've got it locked to the Audacious Living Podcast. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. Welcome to episode 224 of the podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by Amanda Blackwood, who's here to share her incredible story of perseverance, resilience, and determination. You see, at a young age, Amanda was forced into human trafficking and stands today as a survivor, inspiring so many others to not give up. She dedicates much of her time creating awareness to the harmful and traumatic impacts it can have on its victims. And Amanda's story really will have you in disbelief. And I'm telling you, it's impactful in so many ways. So pleased to have her on this edition of the podcast. And so without any further ado, I'm going to stand out of the way and give you a chance to hear Amanda's awesome, audacious, and inspiring story. Hey, Amanda, thank you for joining me today here on the Audacious Living Podcast. It is a pleasure. And thank you for making the time like this.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here with you, Audley. I enjoy your podcast, actually.
Thank you very much. It very much is a labor of love, and I enjoy the fruitful dialogues and conversations of how we can show up in a more audacious state in this world. And so it's an honor just to be able to have these conversations. And it's the individuals that agree to sit down with me is the ones I'm really appreciative of. So thank you. I should say that again.
I love it. I love it.
Now, one of the things that one of the themes that we oftentimes talk about on the podcast here is how individuals can, whether it's use situations or adversity, call them challenges, however you want to define them, but to get past those situations, because we all know adversity is here. It's a part of life. It's going to come, and it's incumbent on us to find some way to move through that as quickly as we can. And so, and you very well would, through your own personal story, you know a little bit about that and sort of the trauma that's left behind and how to manage that and heal from that. So maybe as a starting point, Amanda, I can get you to sort of open up a little bit about your story and what got you to this point that you're at now.
Absolutely. So I often introduce myself as an author, artist, speaker, and survivor. When people ask me what it is that I'm a survivor of, that's when I throw in the big surprise. I am a survivor 3 times of human trafficking. I'm also a survivor of early childhood abuse. Most survivors of trafficking are. Okay. And when I do get into my story, it's also really important that people have a broad understanding of, in general, what human trafficking actually is, because it doesn't look like and it doesn't sound like the things that we've been conditioned to think it is. Yeah. When we see it in the movies, we see it on TV, we see it in the media, it's either prostitution or it's little kids being kidnapped by total strangers. In reality, most prostitution, of course, is human trafficking, but not all human trafficking. Okay. And very, very few times are victims of human trafficking ever actually subjected to a form of kidnapping. Okay. Also, 3/4 of all victims are over the age of 18. So I try to get people to figure out what human trafficking is. And by doing this, I always let them know it's important to use reputable resources. So going to Google, going to Wikipedia, these are not reputable resources. They have multiple people that offer input on this stuff.
And it's opinions, right?
Right, exactly. Right. So it's important to get a solid fact-based definition. The best place to do that is the Department of Homeland Security. Okay. They define human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or commercial sex acts from another person. So if you notice, there's several key factors here missing that we often think about as being associated with human trafficking. One of them being trafficking. We think of that as cars on the road. You notice there's no mention of transportation in that definition.
No.
Commercial sex acts. You notice there's no mention of actual money. So again, back to prostitution being separate from human trafficking, huge overlapping in human smuggling, huge overlapping in prostitution, but one does not automatically equal the other. There's also no mention of age.
Okay.
So you can be any age to be subjected to trafficking. The youngest person here in Colorado in recent years to be saved from trafficking was a 3-month-old infant. The oldest was in her 70s. So with my story, I started being molested when I was about 4 years old. I grew up being treated as a sex object that other people had absolute autonomy and control over.
Okay.
It continued on through my preteen years, my teen years. I was molested by an uncle, by a stranger in a parking lot, by a kid at the swimming pool. It was just this thing. I felt like I had this target on me, just in big, bold, tattooed letters across my forehead. Take advantage of me. It's easy to do. But when you grow up where the environment around you is so poisonous, every single person in your family is abusive, you do kind of learn to seek out these kinds of abusive behaviors subconsciously.
Right.
So this is something that was
you're attracting it, essentially.
right. Exactly. And people that want to manipulate and abuse others are looking for those weaknesses, and they spot them so easily, and they know how to exploit them. This is what domestic violence is. This is how it starts. This is how trafficking starts. They look for people who have something missing from their lives. They promise to fill that void. Then they get the person to depend on them, and then they do whatever they want because they know there's no consequences for them. So when I was 18 was the first time I was trafficked. It was by a boyfriend. I left very quickly after it happened, but that did not prevent me from being locked up for 52 hours in a hotel room where the staff was paid off to not ask questions. I moved on, left that area. That was in Arizona. I moved on to Florida, planned on staying with my grandmother while I got a knee surgery that I needed desperately to have done, and was abandoned on the streets by my family. I was told that they were not allowing me to come and stay with them. I was on my own and good luck. And a young couple came and found me sitting at the Greyhound bus station, crying my eyes out, and offered me a place to stay until I could get on my feet. What they really did was they offered me a place to stay until they could find the highest bidder. And they sold me to a guy named Esteban, who locked me up for 23 and a half hours in a small room with no food, no water, and no bathroom facilities. And I'm a kid of the 80s, latchkey kid. I'm an old woman by some standards. In fact, this year, I'm a grandma. But in the 80s, there was this TV show on called MacGyver. I grew up watching this show. The man could fix anything with a paperclip and a rubber band.
Every Monday night.
Yeah, exactly. Richard Dean Anderson was my hero, literally. So watching that show had such an impression on me that here I was locked up in this small room, and I'm like, I've got to figure a way out of this. What would MacGyver do? Right. And I sat down and I MacGyvered my way out of this room. So I got away from Florida and got as far away as humanly possible, moved all the way out to California. In California, my ambition was to really find a way to support myself where I don't have to depend on anybody else ever again. By the way, I never got the knee surgery. Still need to have it done. But I wanted to get a job as an assistant to somebody important, because I thought that was the only way that I would ever come close to being important myself. Instead, I ended up acting, and I was on Alias and Will and Grace, and I modeled for Harley Davidson. I did a lot of really cool stuff in LA.
Cool.
Eventually, I find my way into being a mall cop, and it doesn't sound all that exciting, but within 5 months, I had busted open a massive embezzlement ring and worked my way up to the top and became a director of public safety and security for 6 different properties in LA County. I was becoming somebody important rather than being somebody else's assistant. I was the assistant. I mean, I had my own assistant. It was amazing. But this was 2004 when all of this started, and over the next 7 years, the world of internet dating kind of blew up.
Okay.
And we started seeing a lot more things happening with human trafficking, with manipulation, with catfishing, and people pretending to be somebody else on the internet. This became a massive thing. It was really easy to hide behind your screens.
Yes.
I met a man who seemed to be exactly what he said he was. He really was a really great guy. He was 6'1", handsome, good looking.
Okay.
The biggest problem was he lived out of the country.
Okay.
So we decided that I had a life in California. He had a life there. The only thing that we were ever going to be to each other was friends. So over a period of 7 years, this friendship grew, and eventually he came to visit me. I went to go and visit him. And here I was finally in this career and having a solid footing on the ground. I bought my first car, had my first apartment with nobody else on the lease. And he asked me to get a fiance visa and move to Scotland to go and be with him.
Okay.
So I got rid of the job. I got rid of the car, lost the apartment. I gave
the life you created for yourself.
Right, exactly. It took me all these years to create this, and I'm willing to give it up that fast because I was lonely and I needed love and I wanted some sense of stability. And these were all the things that he was offering me.
And you know, and sorry, I wanted to go back really quickly because what was really impressive with what you had done for yourself up until that point is you hadn't let the incidents that took place early in your life impact you. So from establishing yourself, right? Like you were on your way, you got a job. I was like, so I think, and I make a point of identifying that because I think it's important to recognize and identify and highlight and celebrate the fact that, you did achieve at that point, despite what you had gone through. So congratulations.
Right. Thank you. I mean, looking back, I can recognize it now as being part of a trauma reaction. I had a need for control.
Okay.
I wanted to control my own life. I wanted to control my own destiny.
Okay.
And I felt like I had far more control over the world around me than I actually did at the time.
Okay.
But I did take control everywhere that I could. And it did help to propel me in that way. I took huge chances. Busting open an embezzlement ring. I had no idea what I was doing. But I did it because I was willing to take the chance. I'd already seen so much wrong in my life. I wasn't willing to sit by anymore and watch wrong things happen.
Makes sense.
So, yeah. And that's part of the reason why I did so well. I mean, I'm a high school dropout with no college education. I didn't think I'd ever get anywhere in life.
I love it. No, I do that because we oftentimes, we limit ourselves or think we're unable to achieve something or make anything of our lives. And to know that you put yourself on that pathway to do just that, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a challenge.
Sure.
And looking back, I recognize some of this too was my absolute redheaded stubbornness. So I remember when I was leaving home, I started running away at 15. The cops kept dragging me back. And I remember when I was 18, I had an airline ticket to leave the state and I planned on never coming back. But the problem was I didn't have a driver's license. So my dad had to give me a ride to the airport. 2 days after I turned 18, we were on our way to the airport. My dad leaned over and he told me, he says, "Your mom and I were talking last night. She said she gives you 6 months before you come crawling back to us. I said, I give you 3.
Okay.
So I had it in my head. I was never going back because I was never going to allow them to be right about me. I was willing to go through whatever I had to go through to prove that they were wrong. Yeah. And I recognize that it was a hard thing to go through. It was a hard life lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But at one point, when I got out of the situation in Florida, I did reach out to them and asked them for help, and they said no. At the time, I didn't realize that they were who had called my grandmother and said, "If you take her in, we'll never speak to you again." They were the reason that I was left on the streets. I had no idea. So Even if I had gone crawling back, would they have taken me in? I don't know. So this man had asked me to get a fiancé visa and move to Scotland to be with him. I was 31 years old at the time.
Okay.
And I got the visa. We had planned an April wedding. It was going to be, I think, the day before Kate Middleton married the prince.
That's right.
Right. And it was the same year and everything. And we had picked the date before they had. So
Got you.
Just throwing that out there. But I was going to move to the land of kings and castles. And this is what every little girl who grows up in an abusive household watching Cinderella and Snow White dreams of. You know, it's the fairy tale ending.
Right.
And we had known each other for 7 years. And it took him 7 years to get me there. It took him 7 days to start trafficking me. It was brutal. At 31 years old, I was being subjected to forced starvation. I was waterboarded. I had sleep deprivation of, I believe, up to 8.5 days, but I was hallucinating at that point, so I'm not sure completely. Anytime I didn't do as I was being told or compelled to do, I would have to go through these things. So I learned to just comply. Very quickly, I tried to find a way out. He had taken away my passport and debit card and all that stuff pretty quickly after I got there. So one night when he had guests over, we'll call them guests, my job was to entertain, of course. And I had been a waitress because, you know, when you're a high school dropout with no college education, that's one of the few jobs that you can actually get and succeed at. I had been a waitress for a while, and I remembered the importance of keeping a coffee cup full when you're in a diner. Well, here I am, supposed to be the entertainer for the evening, the only entertainment of the evening, and he had a whiskey glass. And for the next 5 hours, I didn't let him see the bottom of it. At the end of the night, the man was so drunk that when I told him that if he gave me back those things, I could go and get the money out of the bank the next day and we could spend it, he bought the whole story, hook, line, and sinker, gave me back all my documents, and then forgot about it because he was so drunk.
Right.
Rather than going and getting the money out of the bank, what I did was the very next day, I jumped on a computer and tried to purchase the first flight out that I could afford. Right. The very first flight out was $12,000. There was no way I could swing that. I had a little over $2,000 in my account. The first flight out that I could afford, I would have to wait 5 days for.
Okay.
And I had grown up being told my whole life, you've been through worse, you'll get through this too. And it's a really dangerous mindset, especially for somebody who's going through any kind of violence or abuse.
Yep.
So I had this in my mind that I've been through worse. I can get through the next 5 days. It's 5 days. That's all. In those 5 days, the abuse got so bad that I ended up with a kidney infection so severe I was in the hospital when the flight took off. And it was a non-refundable flight, and I only had $11 left over. I was stuck there.
Yeah.
I started to lose hope. At one point, I tried to end my own life, suicide by train. And eventually I started to kind of turn things around, and I needed to get smart. Since I had grown up the way that I had kind of always been a student of human nature, and I wanted to know more about psychology. So privately, without anybody knowing, I had for years been studying psychology on my own. And I learned all about what we used to call Stockholm syndrome, but we now call trauma bonding. I still call it Stockholm syndrome because I'm just, of that generation, I guess.
Understood. No, I understand.
I'm old. But I learned throughout the years what that looks like. And I learned how to emulate that. I didn't actually have Stockholm syndrome when I first started to leave this breadcrumb trail for him to follow, to make him believe that I would do anything for him. Right. But eventually it did start to take hold because I lived in that mindset so much, 24 hours a day, trying to convince him. So my visa was coming close to the end. It was June of 2011. My visa was going to run out on July 11th. And I told him one day, we sat down and I said, my visa is is running out. The day that we had set up that we were going to get married is come and gone, and we didn't get married. So if I overstayed a visa, according to UK laws, I could get kicked out of the country and never allowed back. And you, being a police officer, could lose your job. And we wouldn't want that, would we? So here's my plan. If you send me back to California, I still have friends out there. I can go and stay with a friend and sleep on a couch and find a job and get by for 6 months and then come back. And I could come back in time for Christmas if I leave quickly enough.
Right.
And wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to spend our first Christmas together?
So up until this point, he feels that you're happy and satisfied with your living situation?
He knew that I wasn't, because when I tried to get out of there and the kidney infection, everything, he found out about that flight. He knew that I tried to get out for an emergency. And that was when the worst of the physical torture actually started to take place.
Right.
So he knew that I wasn't happy, but he was a police officer. He had also studied psychology. It was a battle of wits. He knew every bit as much about psychology as I did, and possibly more.
Okay.
I had a real challenge of trying to convince him of my sincerity. Okay. I had been a pathological liar as a child. It's one of those symptoms, one of those side effects of having an abusive childhood and sexual trauma at a very young age. But I had gotten away from that and had grown into this completely different person. And I had to regress very much so within my own maturity levels to be able to pull this off.
Right.
And it was tough. But he knew that I wasn't happy. But because I had, after the attempt on my life, I started leaving these little breadcrumbs and making him start to believe that I had changed all that around. I didn't complain anymore. I went above and beyond. I made lavish dinners. I would cook and clean the house. I would do all of the laundry, and I did everything without complaining. I went out and painted his yard fence. I did anything and everything that needed to be done without being asked, always making sure that I could predict what it was that he was going to need next. It was a part of wanting to have that convincing backstory of, I would do anything for you.
Right.
You can trust me. And eventually it worked. So when he bought me the round trip flight, I left there on June 19th of 2011. So 12 years ago, last month was actually my anniversary of having gotten out. But the story,
of freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Anniversary of your freedom.
Yeah, it really was. And the significance of the date has never been lost on me. You know, a couple of years ago, I was working a corporate job and they said that we could choose either June 19th or July 11th to have as our holiday. June 19th is my holiday. It's important to me.
Yes.
But having just left didn't mean that all of this abuse and this massive cycle of all of this trauma ended. You know, a very famous author once said that a happy ending depends on where you stop telling the story. If I stop telling the story there, it sounds like this great big victory and you can see me marching down the street with shining lights and people applauding and confetti and everything. And that's not what it was. Not at all. I went into hiding. He came looking for me. He found my address and was off by a single number, and I saw him banging on the neighbor's door. He attacked me repeatedly. Every time he found out that I would have a new job or a new friend, he would take all these photos and videos that he had taken during my rapes and molestations and send them to these people. I lost jobs. I lost friends. I had lies and stories made up about me. I was harassed constantly. This had become my life. I tried to move on. I moved from one job to a next. And eventually I became a flight attendant because I was afraid of flying. And I know that sounds really strange, but I wanted to see the world and I no longer cared if I lived to get back. So being a flight attendant to me, it just became this natural thing of I'm going to get to explore the world. And if I die in a plane crash, oh, well.
Right. Right.
And I did that for 2 years, 3 months, 28 days, not that I was counting, collected a lot of hilarious stories, had a fabulous time actually doing it, got over my fear of flying. Now I love it. And I started to kind of try to piece together a life. I was doing all right. I had my own apartment again. This time I had a cat. I had a little life that depended on me, and that got me through some really dark days.
Yeah, I can see
But
that.
in 2016, I moved out to Colorado. In 2019 was when the whole world came crashing in on me. I had a job where I had worked my way up from low man on the totem pole again.
Right.
Was working my way through the ranks, was a salaried, trusted position, and was rewriting the way that certain processes were done in all 19 of our offices across the country.
Okay. Wow.
This man in Scotland took all these photos and videos, and he couldn't find me. So he put them up on a pornography website and made me famous overnight and connected it to all of my social media.
Wow.
My company found out, and I was fired. I lost my job. I had some total stranger walk up to me in a grocery store and ask me for my autograph, not because I was on Alias and Will and Grace or because I modeled for Harley Davidson or any of the really cool things that I'd done, but because he recognized me from rape video. I was broken. I was so broken. I had never really figured out how to deal with it. I had just kind of glossed over it and moved on with my life and thought to myself, if I stop thinking about it, then I'll move on and I'll get over it. But that's not the way our brains and our hearts process things. And I didn't get that. I was still so broken. So I reached out to an anti-trafficking organization that paired me up with a therapist. I traumatized my first therapist so much that she left the industry. They paired me up with a second one, and she was great. She had already worked with other survivors. And when I went into a conversation with her for the first time, I told her, I said, I have two very strict things about me that you need to know. Number one, do not come at me with prescription medication advice. I don't want a Band-Aid. I want a shovel. I want to dig to the root of the problem.
Right.
And number two, don't treat me like I'm some fragile porcelain doll, because if I was going to break, I would have done it already. Now let's get some work done.
It's a great starting point.
Yeah. It was about 1.5 years of this intensive therapy. We did EMDR, we did tapping, we did talk therapy. We did all kinds of stuff. Art therapy is when I discovered that I could paint, was immediately following my therapy. Now I have a solo art exhibit coming up for the entire month of August. And at the end of all of the therapy, she asked me what I was going to do. She said, I don't think there's much more that I can do to help you. I'm always here for you, but what are you going to do next? Because I know that you're not done.
Great question.
Yeah. I told her, I said, I think I'm going to write my book. And she said, well, haven't you already written a couple books? I said, yeah, I have, but not the book.
Yes.
I'm ready to write the book.
Telling the story.
Yeah. The whole thing from 4 to 39. Yeah. And she said, well, that sounds great. It's November now. So I'll check back in with you in January and see how it's going. If you need me, you know how to reach me. When she called me in January, she said, so how's it going? And I said, oh, I'm doing great. How are you doing? She said, no, that's not what I asked. Now, how are you doing? How is it going? How's the book going? I told her, I said, oh, it's done. How is it done? Did you write another short one? No, ma'am. It's 350 pages. How did you write 350 pages? Aren't you still working 2 full-time jobs? Yes, ma'am. How did you do it? She asked. And I told her, I said, when you're ready, you can't not do it. It just pours out.
I love it.
My book was published on my 10-year anniversary of freedom from trafficking. So that was June 19th of 2021. And the following month is when I met my husband.
Wow. The journey that you went through, Amanda, is phenomenal, because it was definitely full of ups and downs. And you can see in the midst of it, clearly, even in the midst of it, you were identifying, you were clear on what was happening to you, and also clearing on the impacts it was having as well, too. The point of again, I talked off the top of adversity, that point of giving up, it's very easy to do, and it's always there. What prevented you from giving up?
I think the choices between giving up and not giving up were as basic as humanly possible. They were the choices between life and death. I saw no option other than to keep going until that day that I tried to take my life. I had gone to a train station. My plan was that I was going to commit suicide by train. And while I was there, I had been a smoker at the time. I had taken one cigarette with me and a small book of like 3 matches. And I lit my cigarette and I was sitting there smoking it when a stranger walked out onto the platform, and he asked me for a light, and I gave him my matches. And I told him, as I handed them to him, very specifically, I said, "You can keep them. I won't need them anymore." And the reason I did this was because I wanted him to ask why. And he didn't ask. And I knew, just like the rest of the time in my life, I could not make this stranger care.
Right.
It wasn't going to be possible. He was somebody who is saying, "It's not my problem." I had very obviously been upset and crying. He didn't want to get involved. And this is very, very common. We see this everywhere now. But a little guy, about 4 years old, came out on the platform and took his daddy's hand and looked at me. And it was the first time a human being had really seen me in months and possibly years at that point. Right. And I knew in that moment that I could not do to this child what had been done to me. I could not take away his innocence by ending my life in front of him. And he was the only reason that I didn't go through with it. I was very close to giving up. I really was. But I knew that this child deserved better than what I had. Right. And that was the reason I didn't end things that day.
No, and again, the motivating factor, it may be different for something, might be the same, but the idea is we still have to keep pushing forward and keep pushing ahead, which you've clearly done. Fast forward now, you've been very outspoken, at least an advocate against human trafficking. I wonder if you guys ever talk about where we heard about where you were. What's happening for you now?
These days, I focus on doing a lot of talks on stages all across the country. Mainly, I speak in churches, and it is incredibly rewarding being able to do this work. Almost every single time I go out and speak, when I do break down the definition of human trafficking, I talk about what it actually is rather than what it's portrayed as. Almost every time somebody comes up to me and afterwards and says, "I didn't know I was a victim of human trafficking." That's the moment where people start to recognize that they can address what their issues are now. They can understand it more. They can really start digging down and breaking it down and starting to heal from it. That's the greatest thing in my world. First of all, is God. Second of all, is my husband. But after all of that is the ability of knowing that I can have a positive impact on somebody else's life and help them to move beyond all the pain and to give them some kind of an example of it's possible.
Yes. I love the idea of moving beyond the pain, right? Like it's things are going to happen. Like I oftentimes use the analogy of life being a series of hills and valleys.
Right.
You know, on the top of the hills, things are great. We celebrate, we're happy, life is going well. But as we go on that journey of life and we head down the valleys, it's darker, it's painful, it hurts, doesn't feel comfortable. But again, it's part of that journey. And so ideally, what you want to be able to do is go through the valleys as quickly as you can, stop the pain as quickly as you can by coming out of it. And so that's really the goal. Not to say it won't happen at all. It will. These bad things are going to happen. Certainly, you experienced a significant amount of it throughout your life, but you also recognize that you had to keep going. And by keeping going, the other side of that adversity, the other side of those challenges, or the top of the hill, is where all the greatness lies.
Absolutely. And it's so worth it to face that climb too. I mean, it might look daunting and it might feel like it's going to take you forever because you're pushing a boulder up that hill with you.
Yeah.
But if you find your people, you find your tribe, you find people that know how to do this journey, they will help you. They will not only push your boulder for you, but they will scoop you up in a wheelbarrow and push you right up that hill with it.
Yeah. Well, the energy that you may not have, right? And that's the beauty of when you have the right people around you, and just when you're too tired to push, or you don't have the energy, or you doubt yourself, they come along and rejuvenate you and inspire you, or give you something that keeps you going. Just so important to be surrounded by the right people.
Absolutely. Surrounded by real love and trust and
Yeah.
friendship. Yeah. And to be able to spot the signs of when it's not that too. It's really important to start building these healthy boundaries and having healthier, more fruitful relationships with people.
Yeah, very true, very true. On the topic of trauma, um, yes, and certainly you have those traumatic events that's happened in people's lives that are very overt. They know exactly what it is. They can pinpoint it. But then there's other trauma that's maybe a bit more hidden, or sometimes people don't even realize that it is there until they start doing some of the work. I wonder if you sort of talk about the impacts of trauma that they have on us, and why it's so important for us to address them as soon as we can.
There's so much about trauma that reworks our brain. When we go through something traumatic, whether we realize it or not, our brains start to develop these new neural pathways.
Mm,
Okay, so if XYZ happens, then I need to do ABC. Sometimes, and most of the time, this is very helpful in the moment, in the
yeah.
actual traumatic situation. But when you start doing these same behaviors, whenever you're reminded of this other event, you can start to really break down any kind of communication. You can have these new trauma reactions that are starting up that are very unhealthy, that can lead to other problems. One of the biggest signs and symptoms is self-destructive behavior. We're talking somebody that drives recklessly, or drugs and alcohol and all of these things that are not great for you, and you don't understand why you're doing this to yourself. This is a sign, this is a symptom that you've been through something traumatic that you haven't yet addressed.
Right, right.
So one of my books is the first book in the Growth from Darkness workbook series is
Okay.
about the stages of trauma.
Okay. Yep.
So you can go through this book and you can figure out where you are in the stages of trauma, if you've dealt with it, if you've come from denial, anger, bargaining into the stage of depression, or if you're in the acceptance phase yet. Where are you? And to understand that they're not fluid, they're not linear. You're going to bounce around in this room, and all of these stages are like the walls, and you're a rubber ball that's just bouncing. Eventually, you will settle, you will land, hopefully, if you allow yourself to. Once you're there, you can start figuring out what your trauma reactions are. You can learn about what the long-term consequences of having them might be and how to fight back against them. And the trauma reactions is actually book 2 in the workbook series, and it'll be coming out later on this year.
Amazing.
Really important beyond that is learning how to build these healthy boundaries and how to communicate with the people in your life on what it is that you actually need. How can they best support you?
Yes.
Doing enough research in this area, there's plenty of information out there. You don't have to get my workbooks to be able to go through this process to really understand where you are. My workbook kind of streamlines it a little bit, but there's information out there. We are at the age of the internet. If
Yeah.
you don't know what resources are available to you, it's the same thing as not having resources. So go out and find the resources and use them. You can change your trauma reactions. You can change the way that trauma is affecting you.
Amazing. Amazing. Amanda, I absolutely so love this your story. And not so much the parts of what happened to you, it's what you did about it. And I think that's where people can find inspiration, and be able to look past their situation, or maybe someone's gone through something similar to you, and is kind of looking for answers, and to know that you've gone through something that you've been able to get the other side of is powerful. But will equally for me, which is even more powerful, is you taking the time to share. And that's so important, the sharing of the stories, because you inspire, you give hope, and you empower other people. So thank you for doing that, and congratulations on the great work and what you're continuing to do, because it's awesome. It really is.
Thank you so much, Audley. It's been a heck of a journey. I'm glad I am where I am.
Hmm. Much to be proud of. And so, for you mentioned books. Let's talk about the books, and where fans with our listeners who wanted to snag when I get a hold of them. Where could we send them?
I would say go to my website, growthfromdarkness.com. You can find links to be able to purchase them through reputable book sources, whether that's Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you can buy them directly from me if you want signed copies.
Amazing. Amazing. Amanda, this has been such a treat, a delight. Thank you for doing this. And again, congratulations on all the great work.
Thank you so much, Audley, and thank you for having me.
Take care. And back we are here on the podcast, and much thanks and appreciation goes out to Amanda for being here and sharing her very, very powerful story. You know, as I said off the top, the pathway she took to overcome the childhood abuse and sexual trauma that she faced at such a young age is incredibly inspiring, and as well as her ability to move beyond the pain and adversity, to be pushed to the limits that she had gone to was a very dark place. But not only did she get out of that space, she's now able to help others through her speaking and her books. And I certainly encourage listeners to connect with Amanda directly through her website. Her site is growthfromdarkness.com to connect to her. Again, Amanda, thank you for being here and all the best. You know, I appreciated so much of the conversation that I had with Amanda, but if there's just one thing I take from the chat that we had, it would have to be this. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges our way and often leaving us feeling the victims of our circumstances beyond our control. However, it's essential to recognize that we have the power to rise above these adversities and refuse to be defined by them. Let's explore the importance of not succumbing to victimhood when faced with difficult circumstances, while also emphasizing the courage it takes to address and heal from the traumas that we've endured. When bad things happen, it's crucial to acknowledge the impact they have on our lives. Denying or suppressing the pain and trauma can only prolong the healing process. By giving ourselves permission to recognize and accept the emotional wounds, we take the first steps towards reclaiming our power and breaking free from victimhood. Confronting and addressing trauma requires immense courage. It demands vulnerability as we allow ourselves to revisit painful memories and emotions. It's important to remember that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but rather an act of strength. By opening ourselves up to the healing process, we create space for growth, resilience, and transformation. Healing from trauma is often a complex journey that may require professional guidance. Therapists, counselors, and support groups can provide a safe and non-judgmental space for us to explore our experiences, process emotions, and develop healthy coping mechanisms. Seeking professional help is not a sign of failure, but a proactive step towards reclaiming our lives and finding healing. In the face of trauma, it's essential to show ourselves compassion and kindness. Understand that healing takes time and that everyone's journey is unique. Be patient with yourself and allow for setbacks and moments of vulnerability. Treat yourself with the same level of compassion and understanding you would offer a dear friend. Resilience is a cornerstone of overcoming adversity. It's the ability to bounce back, grow, and thrive in the face of trauma. Cultivate resilience by setting healthy boundaries, practicing self-care, and nurturing positive relationships. Surround yourself with a supportive network that uplifts and encourages your healing process. Reclaiming power means reframing the narrative surrounding our experiences. Instead of allowing trauma to define us, we can choose to see ourselves as survivors and thrivers. Recognize the strength and resilience that resides within you. Focus on the lessons learned and the personal growth that has arisen from the challenges that you've already faced. When confronted with bad things, it's easy to fall into that victim mentality. However, by refusing to be defined by our circumstances and having the courage to address the trauma we've endured, reclaiming our power and embarking on a journey of healing and growth, it's so important to move past that. Remember, you are not alone, and seeking support is an act of strength. With resilience, self-compassion, and a willingness to confront the past, you can transform your trauma into an opportunity for personal empowerment and create a brighter, more fulfilling, and audacious future. We've sadly come to the end of another episode of the Audacious Living Podcast. And as always, I want to send out a shout out and thanks to all those lovers of audaciousness and supporters of this podcast that continue to push us forward. And we continue to do this for you. So we say thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.